ओम समस्त जन कल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरम् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्. Okay, so today we begin with verse 52 and we say, I read it. Yada te moha kalilam buddhirvyatitarishyati tada gantasi nirvedam shrutavyasya shrutasya cha. This is the previous verse. So we had done this, and I think we had done that when your intellect crosses beyond the mire of delusion, that means when you lose interest, you grow out of, let us say, all the enchantments of the world of objects, it is at that time that your mind will be steady. So this we had done, and we begin with verse 53 now. श्रुति विप्रतिपन्ना ते यदा स्थास्यति निश्चला समाधावचला बुद्धिः तदा योगमवाप्स्यसि. Okay, it says that when your intellect, though perplexed by what you have heard, shall stand immovable and steady in the self, then you shall attain self-realization. So, see, self-realization is not a easy one step, two step, three step thing. It takes evolutionary time. It is not a revolution. Revolutions are quick and sudden and violent. This perfecting of a human being is an evolutionary process. So it takes time and effort to do it. Now he says, look what he says, when your intellect, because Arjuna's question was that how long would this kind of a thing take? Even if you want to build this equipoise in your mind, won't it take too long? He says, uh, Krishna says, that when your intellect, though perplexed by what you have heard, perplexed by what you have heard over here does not mean this kind of hearing. It means that when your intellect is undisturbed by any inputs into the mind, your intellect and mind is equipoised and refuses to be disturbed by any inputs that come to the subtle body. Subtle body is mind and intellect, basically. So then he says at that time you will have reached samatva. Samatvam is equipoise, right? And that is, like you heard the definition, samatvam yoga uchyate. So if you can reach that equipoise permanently, then it is that you can say that you have reached yoga or you have attained yoga. As I told you before, yoga means joining. So joining what with what? So joining this Jivatma with Paramatma. And joining is not like, see, it is a very interesting thing. People like us normally think when you use the word joining, it means that there are two things, okay? And one joins the other, like two hands. And I say, I join my hands, that means I bring one hand and another hand and I join them. This yoga that we are talking about, it does not talk about two things. It talks about two things which you suppose to be two things, which are not two things. Example, again, as I have given you before also, the dreamer and the waker. They are seemingly two things, but in effect, they are not two things. So when you say the dreamer joined the waker, or that is time the dreamer will join the waker, what does it mean? It means that the waker realizes that he is not the dreamer, that the dreamer never was, and the waker ever is. That is what this yoga means. The dreamer joining the waker means that the dreamer is gone, and the waker has realized that there was no such thing as the dreamer. It doesn't exist. It's only in the mind, generated by the mind, gone back into the mind, disappeared into the mind. So the only reality is the waking mind. Okay. Now then, here the word shrutam, here it is shruti. So shrutam means hearing, of course, but here a lot of people take it literally. So when they say, okay, now we have heard the Gita, okay, we have heard it. So once we have heard it, you mean to say that we have attained the highest yoga? No, that is not the meaning of hearing. The meaning of hearing is that when you actually come to realize, you come to experience, and you become sthit in it. ये देखो samadha vachala. Samadhi is a state of perfect equipoise and no movement. No movement, not of the body alone. Lot of people again say, when you say samadhi, okay, you're sitting with eyes closed. Huh? People like you and me think sitting with eyes closed in a certain position, breathing very softly and deeply, and eyes closed, and the mind is wandering all over the place. No, samadhi means the stabilizing of the mind, the unidirectional focus of the mind, a total equipoise. Because see, here he says achala. Achala means that which does not move. So these are two words, samadhi and achala. So he says, see, that you do not, look at the translation, shall stand immovable and steady in the self. Sthit. Ye dekho, sthasyati. Stha. The word stha means established in. Sthan, I told you, the Hindi word sthan. You are in your true position. You are in your true self. It is only then that your buddhi will attain yoga. See, yogam vapsyasi, it says. Now, see, if you say such a thing, what about the person's attachments and contacts with the outside world? Attachments to and contacts with the outside world, because the outside world is constantly pouring into his mind. The outside world is constantly disturbing his equipoise. So what happens to him then? Now here he is talking about a person who is established in the self. Please don't forget, this verse is talking about the person who is established, because he has already given you a supposition, when the intellect. So when the intellect is achal and in samadhi, when the intellect is absolutely quiet, there is no ripple anywhere. It is at that time that even when the objects of the world hit him, they do not disturb him. Something that is disturbing a child playing, a 3-4-year-old child, as I gave you an example, sometimes that a balloon bursts suddenly. So when a balloon bursts, the child gets disturbed, right? He gets disturbed, but a grown-up human being is not at all disturbed. In fact, he finds it amusing and he may even laugh that the balloon has burst. So things coming in, even when he is surrounded by sensuousness and he's surrounded by objects that can disturb his mind, he's surrounded by agitational things, but he does not get disturbed. The example given is many times of Raja Janak, that is Sitaji's father. Raja Janak was considered a Mahayogi. And he was considered a Mahayogi. So somebody said that how can he be a Mahayogi? He's a king. He's surrounded by women in his bedroom, and he's surrounded by problems in his court, and he's surrounded by all kind of luxuries and all that. How can he be above all this? How can he be unaffected by all this? So then they said, come, I'll show you. So he was taken to Janak's chamber, and the story goes that there were all kind of women around him, where he was on his bed and laughing, talking, joking with them and all that. Somebody was pressing his legs, and somebody was combing his hair, someone was standing with a glass of drink and all that. But apart from that, there was a small fire pit near his bed, and Raja Janak's foot was lying in the fire pit, and he was not disturbed by it. So when your senses are so controlled that even that you are not disturbed by, how can you be disturbed by women standing around you? That man attains such a beautiful equipoise that he goes beyond the body. There are stories of Mahatmas who had a cancerous boil, and the doctor came to operate, and he said, you can do it without giving me any anesthetic, and I will, but when I raise my finger, at that time you can begin the operation. And that whole little surgery is performed without anesthesia, and the man has gone into meditation. When that saint is in deep meditation, he does not feel the body. So they say that his mental state becomes such that, now this mental state is dealt exhaustively later on in the verses that we are going to be doing now, because Arjun's mind is very curious, like your mind and my mind, that how can such an individual be? And even if he is there, how does he interact with the world outside? Because such an individual is abnormal according to us. So then Arjun is all the time wondering, and he's interested. So Arjun's interest has woken up, as you can say, and he is not quite ready to accept the theory fully. He has understood it logically, like you and I have also understood, but it takes a lot of time to accept it and say, we always say, no, this is not possible, this is neither practical nor possible. ये नहीं हो सकता. It's not possible. So that is how we think. So Arjun also thinks the same way, that he himself is too far away from yoga. Arjun is a man of the world. He's a practical man, and a man desirous of so many things like you and I. A man who wants to enjoy life like you and I, who wants to be in the midst of sensuous pleasures and wants to attain things. So then he is really curious to know. But you will notice that even Krishna is very happy here, because Krishna understands that, oh, thank God, Arjun is over his hysteria. At least he is beyond that self pity and sorrow and all that he was experiencing in that Vishad Yoga, that chapter where Arjun is constantly crying and nervous, and weapons are falling from his hand, and he says, I am not going to fight and I'm going to run away. So that stage is finished. His interest is aroused in what Krishna is saying, because that seems to be a very winning situation in life. But can it be achieved? That is his inquiry. And he is in this next verse, he poses a direct inquiry to Krishna, and he wants to know that, is this a casual experience that somebody has once in a while, or is it that you will be established in this experience forever? Also, if you are established in this experience forever and ever, then how do you interact in the world like an ordinary human being? You will be a different kind of human being, or you will be considered abnormal by people, or the people would not like to even interact with you because your reactions are abnormal. So Arjuna's curiosity is awakened, and in this next verse he poses a question. I have told you before also that all our scriptures honor the questioning intellect. They say that the dignity of the intellect lies in questioning and understanding logically and only then accepting, not blind faith. So you will notice that in every scripture there is question and answer, question and answer. Upanishads go for questions and answers. Gita is question and answers. Ramcharit Manas is question and answers. Bhagavad Puran is question and answered. Even other Puranas, Vishnu Puran, Ganesh Puran, Shiv Puran, they all have somebody asked and then some saint replied who had the experience. And he replied and he answered. So it is not that questioning is not allowed or that questioning is blasphemy. No, it is not. What has the Lord given you an intellect for, if not to question everything? So here you have Arjuna's question. Sthita prajnasya ka bhasha samadhisthasya keshava sthitadhi kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. Now he says, what is the vision of a man of realization? And with that vision, how does he interact in the world like a common human being? Or does he ever do it at all? Or he sits in a cave in the Himalayas and doesn't come down? What is it? So he says someone who is not in a casual experience, but it is sthitadhi. See, the word is sthitadhi. Sthitadhi means whose wisdom has been aroused, and he is in total wisdom. That is, these are two words, sthita and dhi. Dhi means the intellect, your thinking power, your discriminative power, your values you hold, the kind of decisions you take. So all that is called dhi. And here it is sthita dhi. Sthita dhi means established in the intellect, established in the discriminatory power of the intellect. And that is why, in India you have these words like samadhi. Samadhi are your in-laws. Samadhi, samadhin. What does it mean? It means when you marry a son or a daughter, then the parents of the spouse of your child are called samadhi. The woman is called samadhin. The mother is called samadhin. Now this only means, sama means equal, dhi means intellect. So people who think like you, people who have the same kind of values. So marriages used to take place between those two families, because then it would be easier for the children to adjust to each other. Because when the values are totally different in two families, then the children are not able to, because each has grown up with a different set of values, a different set of rituals, a different set of traditions, different ways of behavior. So it is very difficult for them to adjust. And that is the reason you look for similar families where arranged marriages. So these days children don't give you a chance, they marry whosoever. And then also the enjoyment or the suffering is their own. Now here see, sthitadhi. He says sthitadhi kim prabhasheta. Kim is a question. He says, how does he talk? And kim asita. How does he sit? And Vrajet Kim, how does he walk? Look at these very, very elementary questions. Asked in a very slipshod manner. They are asked like any ordinary human being like you and me would ask. And what does he ask? I'll read it to you. What, O Keshava, is the description of him who has steady wisdom, who is merged in the superconscious state? How does one of steady wisdom speak? How does he sit? And how does he walk? Now, see, because a man who is steady in wisdom and who is in a samadhi state, how does he protect himself from the temptations of the world? How does he protect himself from the violence of the world? How does he protect himself from all that hits him from every side? Because he may not be a practical man like you and I. He may not be a worldly wise man like you and I. So who wants to be a man like that? And why should I become like that? First of all, I do all that labor, of turning my mind into total equipoise. And then I become a useless man for the world. I'm no longer a practical person, and I no longer enjoy anything in the world. So he is asking these questions, that how does he walk? How does he talk? What is his vision? Hmm? And he calls Krishna over here Keshava. Keshava is Krishna's, one of Krishna's names. Keshav actually translates as the hairy one. Keshav. So it's translated the hairy one. So Krishna had long hair, right? And that long hair, all his pictures that you see, or artists that draw, or even as he is described in the Bhagavatam and all, is all with a little long hair Krishna has. So that is why his name Keshav. So over here, how does he sit and how does he walk? He is asking. And then he says that as a practical man, Arjuna is a little scared of attaining this kind of a goal. He says, but why should I? First of all, I labor so much to attain it. And then once I attain it, I become useless for the world outside. And the world outside becomes useless for me. I lose all interest. Some people really wonder at this. This is a common question, especially youngsters ask this question a lot. That if after all this effort, we do manage to attain yoga, then why should I attain yoga? Because I want to enjoy the world. And if I can't enjoy the world and I am into some kind of mindset of my own, I am useless for work and I'm useless for enjoyment. And while in samadhi, and I'm the inner master of myself, but I'm out for the world outside, I'm useless. So what's the great idea? Why should I have this transcendental experience at all? I don't think I need to have it. Now, we come to the next verse because Krishna is going to answer this question. This is a very common question, and that's the reason why most of the youngsters do not even want to look at spirituality, because they feel that the spiritual man either becomes a sannyasi or that he becomes a gone case, as they say, gone case. Now, I have to tell you this, that there are a lot of people like me. Sorry for the personal example, but there are lots and lots of people around the world who are into the world and also are trying to live a spiritual life. Believe me that by trying to live a spiritual life and trying to get hold of your mind and trying to get control of your mind, you are able to enjoy life much more. You see me, I'm just like you. I'm a grihast. I have a family. I have children. I have not given up anything. I dress up. I meet people. I go to the movies. I go to eat out. I do everything. But I do not allow any of those things to whip me. I do not allow any of those things to hit my mind. And they do hit because I'm not a realized master or something. But when they do hit me, I'm able to snap out of it much faster because of this knowledge. Because my teacher saved my life, I would say, with this kind of knowledge. And I am not the only one. There are millions around the world who are practicing this yoga, a Buddhi yoga as they call it. Buddhi yoga because it is the gymnastic of the mind. You are making the mind strong. Just like children today concentrate so much on building the body in the gym. It's a fad. Every youngster is doing it. So they control their diet, they regulate their life, they regulate their sleep patterns, they exercise every day, they build weights and they lift weights and all the rest of it. That is the physical gym. Okay. Now this is a mental gym. Now once your mental muscles, your intellectual muscles you have built, you are able to take the hits of life very easily. They do not bother you so much. Just like a physically strong man, if somebody gives him a box, he does not find it that painful and he can hit back. Similarly, a man who has built a strong mind, he is able to face the world and not be affected by it, still maintain his equipoise and understand a lot of things which he did not understand before. So now Krishna replies over here, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Prajahati Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmanyevatmana Tushtaha Sthita Prajnastadochyate. Now, from here onwards till the end of this chapter, which is 18 verses, is the highest lyrical poem in the world in any language. It is because of the sublimity of the theme, not because it is beautiful poetry. It is beautiful poetry, very metrical, very easily to be sung, and all that is there, but because of the sublimity of the theme. The gist of all the Upanishads is in these 18 verses. And these 18 verses are about a master who has reached the ultimate goal of yoga, who has attained yoga, yoga of the mind, buddhi yoga, who has attained the buddhi yoga. And so, like, see, it is, and when he describes this to you, he is giving you the qualities of the man of realization. Please, at the very outset, I'm telling you, all these verses are not about people like you and me. So don't equate yourself that I am not like this, so I can never do this. Don't think like that. This is the goal that is being pointed out. That this is how you will be, because that is what he has asked. That when you do perfect yourself, then how do you interact in the world? How do you walk, talk, and behave? Isn't that the question of Arjun? So here Krishna is painting a very beautiful picture of the man of realization, that he does not have at all an oscillating mind. His mind is very, very peaceful. And any mind that is peaceful is a joyous mind. Any mind that has agitation, then in the exact degree of agitation that the mind has, you will be unhappy. The more agitation in the mind, the more unhappiness in the mind. The more tranquility in the mind, the more peace in the mind, the more happy is the mind. Now he says, look, he replies, Prajahati yada kaman. I'll read the translation. When a man completely casts off, O Partha, all the desires of the mind and is satisfied in the self by the self, then he is said to be one of steady wisdom. The question was, who is a man of steady wisdom? What are his behavior patterns? How does he interact with the world outside? The answer is when. He begins with when. So, when does a man become a man of steady wisdom? When a man completely casts off, O Partha, all the desires of the mind. Now, see, in deep sleep, there is no desire. The body is at rest. The mind is at complete rest. There is no agitation. And there is so much of rest to the mind. It is therapeutic. It is curative. Deep sleep is very curative. And that is why we need it every night, right? But this does not mean that a man of realization should go into some kind of drug or some kind of deep sleep and he should continuously sleep, or that he should be under anesthesia. That is not the meaning. But he says when he completely casts off, that means the action is done by the man himself. He consciously drops off all desires of the mind and is satisfied in the self by the self. By the self means he does not need an external agent to satisfy him. His happiness is not dependent on any externality. He does not say that me plus the 100% marks of my child in the exam is equal to happiness. No, he is not saying that. His happiness is independent of any given situation. That is what it means. Not that he doesn't enjoy ice cream, not that he doesn't enjoy a movie, not that he doesn't enjoy somebody loving him. He does. But his happiness, joy in the mind is not dependent on any one of those. It is not me plus a beautiful car, me plus a big house, me plus so much of money. Only then I'll be happy. That is dependence. That is beggary. This man is a king. He is not begging for any situation. He is not begging for anything to satisfy himself. He says, see, satisfied in the self, by the self. He doesn't need to go anywhere. See, these days in the COVID situation, those people whose happiness, sorry, whose happiness was dependent on going to the mall, going to the movies, running out for shopping, this, that, they are miserable. They are miserable because that happiness they cannot get. But I know a lot of people who are following this discipline of spirituality. They are very happy. They say, we don't feel the need of anything. We don't lack anything. We sit very happily in our garden and we are reading. We are trying to ruminate. We are trying to think. And our meditation is much better. And there is so much of peace and tranquility and quietude in the mind. You see the difference? The difference is between dependence and independence. Now, here he says that the mind is satisfied in the self, by the self, not by a car or a house or a money or a this or a that. Then he is said to be one of steady wisdom. Now, see, the teacher is painting this picture and he wants the mind of the student to be absolutely steady, because the teacher cannot paint on a moving canvas. Just like an artist cannot paint on a moving canvas, the picture will not be there. And that is the reason that so many dimensions are listed on the qualities of a student's mind. In every scripture, what a student should be like is given. He has to have that Shat Sampatti and all that. I'm not going into details of that. But a student's mind has to be calm. It has to be attentive. It has to be focused. Only then can this word picture be conveyed. Right? So there has to be a steady surface on which you can paint. Right? Now then, the teacher is trying to protect the student's mind from shattering away or from being agitational in any sense over here. Now, the Gita helps us by the description that you will get of a realized master. The Gita helps us to detect what kind of a teacher you would like to learn from. The teacher has to have very noble values. He has to be an equipoised person. You will notice that people who are living this spiritual life are generally very happy. Even though their life is not perfect, surely their life is not perfect. If you are a grihast, even if you are a sannyasi, your life is not perfect. There will always be lack of this and lack of that, and some trouble brewing somewhere, some another trouble brewing somewhere. It will constantly happen. But then, so what is the difference? There are many people who are, as Gurudev used to say, in the goat skin of a teacher, wearing saffron clothes and trying to pose as great masters. And a lot of people get taken in by such people. A lot of fraud in the name of spirituality goes on in India. And when people get down from the aircraft, there are touts standing at the airport who whisper in the ear of a foreigner, Guru, come this way. And they take you to money making scoundrels who are pretending to be teachers in the garb of sannyasis. And you say, okay, here is a sannyasi, long hair, chandan on the forehead, uh, and saffron garments, and he is sitting somewhere on a deer skin. Okay, this is the picture that is painted, and he is a sannyasi. A sannyasi is not a fancy dress. A sannyasi is not made by garments. I know so many people who are family people, but their mind is that of a sannyasi. They are not easily agitated. They are in deep peace all the time. They also meet difficulties in their life. So these verses are describing to you what a true master should be like. And that is the true master you should choose for your studies. Somebody who can explain and guide to you in your situation in life, and who can always be a friend, philosopher, guide to guide you in every given situation correctly. So don't go for these frauds. And that is the reason all this is listed, that a person who has woken up to the utmost satisfaction, a realized master, is the best guide. But also, Gurudev used to say that you get the kind of teacher that you deserve. And you will yourself gravitate towards the kind of teacher that will help you. So everybody gets a kind of teacher who is of his level of understanding and whose talk you will understand. Like, see, I'm giving you an example of Swami Chinmayananda. All of us have been educated in the English medium. We did not understand Sanskrit. We would never have gone to a Banaras Pandit to study the Vedas or the Upanishads or the Gita. We wanted a master who would speak our language. We wanted a master who was educated in schools like us, who had gone to the university like us, who had knowledge not only of the scriptures but also of the world like us, who had lived the luxurious life given to a man born out of a nobility, and who knew the world very well. We also wanted a master who initially doubted the scriptures, questioned the scriptures, not accepted them blindly because his father told him so and his grandfather told him so. Not like that, because our minds are like that. And therefore, we get a Swami Chinmayananda, born in an aristocratic family, very highly educated man, done his law, a master's in English literature, working as a journalist, full of doubts, full of questions about the scriptures. And he never left his teacher, Swami Shivananda. Continuously questioned him. And that is what our minds are like exactly, isn't it? We don't want to take anything lying down. Absolutely not. If you are educated, if you consider yourself as smart, you will question. So the question Arjun is asking is our question as well. And the question is that what is the state of that master, and how does he sit, how does he walk, how does he eat, and all the rest of it, right? Now, an intellect that is contaminated by ignorance becomes a breeding ground for desires, and that you can never stop that intellect from running out into the fields of objects, emotions, and thoughts, being disturbed by emotions and thoughts. So then, what does this man do? How does this man, see, this man grows up as he's saying that he's satisfied in himself. This is a stage of evolutionary growth. In a few of my previous talks, I had given you the example of marbles. A child values his marbles very much. Beautiful, colorful, shining. But when he gives them to his father to keep safely, does the father feel very happy that, wow, what a great treasure have I got? No, he doesn't. And when the child comes back to him to take those marbles back, he give them back to me now, come on. By giving back those marbles, does the father feel that he has lost something? No. So similarly, an ordinary human being like you and me values the things of the world and is agitated by the things of the world. And when you get them, you are happy. When you lose them, you are unhappy. But a great master that he is describing over here has elevated himself. He has grown out of the desire. He does not, Prajahati here does not mean gives up. Prajahati means they fall off from him. They are completely gone. So he can't pretend to have desires. If you don't have a desire to play with a doll, can you pretend? You will not even like to pretend. It's a waste of time. You will just take the doll away, right? So you have grown out of that. And not that you are without anything. You have much higher peace of mind. You have a much deeper, much more intrinsic experience of joy than the ordinary human being has. And then you do not want to settle for anything less, because that becomes your benchmark. That becomes your benchmark for everything. And you go on thinking of how you can get that very experience of happiness that you experienced once. Right? And here is Krishna answering, whose life was full of tragedy, whose life was full of adversity, whose life was full of tears, if tears, but Krishna was always smiling. We know Krishna's life. We have all heard about him. We know Buddha's life. We know Christ's life, who was crucified. But see the realized master, that even when he was being put on the cross, he says, "Oh Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Just imagine. That is the realized master. His state of peace and happiness and joy in his mind is much, much higher than the normal person. And it does not depend on anything. He rises above all his sorrows. He rises above all his joy, troubles. So, wouldn't we like to achieve some state of mind which is like that? That nothing binds him, nothing enslaves him, nothing shackles him. He is a free man, right? So then, when you achieve such a situation, then if somebody asks you, you want to play with a rattle? Doll, anybody? A small toy train, anybody? What are you going to say? No, no, that is for the kids. You have experienced much higher joy and your toys are much higher. So the next we will do next time. That's it. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.